We'll bring the hearing back to order and continue. Chairman Micah should be back momentarily. With that, I believe Mr. Hart, you're up. I wasn't paying attention. Has he been introduced properly? No, he hasn't. Okay. Let me do that. I can't read. I don't have my glasses. Yeah, Thomas Hart, who's the Vice President of Government Affairs and the General Counsel for the U.S. High-Speed Rail Association. Good thing I remembered some of that because I couldn't read it. So with that, Mr. Hart, please proceed.
Shuster, I'd like to thank Chairman.
Pull it a little bit closer to you.
I'd like to thank Chairman Micah for calling this hearing. I'd like to also thank Ranking Member Rahal and Subcommittee Ranking Member Corrine Brown, and acknowledge my Congresswoman, Eleanor Holmes Norton. Thank you for having me here. This is honestly my fourth time before this committee on this subject this year, so I'm glad to be back. I've put a lot of time and thought in this testimony over the last 6 months, and I'm really glad that we have advanced the discussion and debate on the need for private investment and increased competition in our rail system nationwide, but particularly the Northeast Corridor. As most of you know, the United States High-Speed Rail Association is a nonprofit trade association committed to advancing a state-of-the-art nationwide true high-speed rail system to be completed in phases across the country. I am the Vice President for Government Affairs and General Counsel for the association. I also am here as the Director of the Washington office of the national law firm of Quarles and Brady. This is a real opportunity for progress to be made within this committee and within the body of Congress. The U.S. High-Speed Rail Association works with everybody that is truly committed to advancing high-speed rail. That is reflected in just my schedule this week, where Monday I spent a number of hours with Senator Mark Kirk in Chicago, and he advanced on Monday and proposed private-public partnership legislation in the Senate called the Lincoln Legacy Infrastructure Development Act. And also, while I was in Chicago, I spoke before Reverend Jesse Jackson's Rainbow Push Coalition and brought them up to speed on the initiatives in high-speed rail across the country. So we speak to everyone, we engage with everyone, and that includes the staff of this committee, both on the minority and majority side. I commend their work on this piece of legislation and look forward to working with them and the members going forward. This is a real key opportunity, and I hope that the members of this committee take advantage of it. This issue divides the committee pretty much down the line. As you mentioned at the last hearing, Chairman Shuster, 50% of the group here wants to zero out Amtrak, wants to basically eliminate funding for them and possibly privatize the entire system. The other 50%, some of them feel that Amtrak is a sacred cow, should receive additional funding without oversight and real strict accountability. The United States High-Speed Rail Association is somewhere in the middle, literally. We are a firm believer in competition and a firm believer of private capital investment in high-speed rail. We also recognize Amtrak as a unique service, and we don't support the pure privatization of Amtrak in its totality. But with this divide in Congress and the divide in the Senate and the leadership at the presidential level, it is important that we compromise to achieve our goal of bringing private capital into the nation's rail system and move quickly to do so with the type of bill that has been presented by you, Chairman Shuster, and Chairman Micah. But unfortunately, the political reality is the bill will not pass the Senate in its current form. But at the same time, the status quo is unacceptable. We do not accept Amtrak's monopoly position in the Northeast Corridor. We do not support Amtrak's the monopoly position, and we don't, frankly, accept many of the reasons why Amtrak has been delayed in advancing high-speed rail across the country. So we take what we consider to be the best parts of the concept behind the bill that was presented and offer our own suggestion. we've actually proposed legislation back in March called the Private Investment in High-Speed Rail Act of 2011. At that time, we proposed private investment in Amtrak through increased offering of stock and bonds. Amtrak only has one shareholder, that's the United States government. Specifically, Chairman Shuster, we've outlined a proposal that would split Amtrak into two entities, Amtrak Operations and Amtrak Infrastructure. The operations would run the trains. The infrastructure would maintain and manage the rail infrastructure in the Northeast Corridor, and it would increase the opportunity for investment up to 40%. I think that is a fair compromise. We can bring up to 40% of private equity into Amtrak, sell off the 40% of the infrastructure subsidiary or infrastructure company that is currently totally owned by Amtrak. That's a significant investment that will get the attention of Wall Street, but it will maintain the government control over the infrastructure and will provide for safety and security concerns, as Mr. Boardman indicated. But we need to bring in the private sector, and by offering up 40% of the infrastructure facility, that would bring substantial money. After 5 years, we could reevaluate that structure and possibly increase, give the investor an opportunity to increase its investment by another 20% and move them in the majority position. We also suggest that we add a infrastructure bank provision that's supported in the Senate on a bipartisan basis now. We need to include that. And also a small business provision. Amtrak has gotten $450 million just recently for procurement. They want the money, but they don't necessarily want the responsibility and accountability for increasing small business participation in this sector. So a small business provision should also be added to this bill. That will go a far way in getting more bipartisan support. So I look forward to your questions, Mr. Chairman, and other members of this committee, and working with you in the future. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Mr. Hart, for your testimony. I just want the record to show I've always been one in the middle on this issue, too. My colleagues on my side have, for the last 20 years, talked about killing Amtrak, selling it off, doing away with it, where my colleagues on the other side of the aisle say it can never succeed without the government doing it, running it, and I come down the middle. It's somewhere in between there, and I think we can do it, and our bill is a start in that direction, I believe. And the last thing I want to say is it's not a question for Mr. Wytkind. It's a request. You're very clear on where you stand. I understand that. But you've talked about discussing other models. And so not today, but I'd love for you to put together your ideas on how you do this, as long as it has a private element to it, because I just don't believe we can go forward. If your solution is the federal government ought to give $3 billion a year for the next 10 years to Amtrak or whatever the number is, it's not going to happen. We're in a world, we have to be realistic about where we're going with this. I believe that what we're doing is realistic. That's why we're having this hearing today, to talk about other ways to do this. And so I would welcome you to present me with don't have to be a 40-page paper, but something that's reasonable, that includes a private sector element into it, talking about various labor guarantees and things we can do to get you to consider moving in a different direction.
Let me just, I won't give you the 40-page answer now, because I think you'd throw me out for good. I'm happy to come back to you with all of our thoughts. We've provided some of them today. But as I've said publicly, and we're going to continue to say, Amtrak needs to be the centerpiece of this proposal. We are not against private sector participation. A significant portion of my membership that I'm elected to represent works in the private sector.
And they make more money. And
I understand, well, that's debatable depending on the job. But that's the point I'm making is I don't come in here with a bias that says the private sector's role is not important and therefore we should ignore it. But as long as you understand the proposals I come back to you with are going to be with the centerpiece of the proposal being Amtrak as the primary high-speed rail provider for the country.
I welcome looking at them. So,
can I add?
Yes, sir.
Mr. Shuster. I thought Rick Geddes brought up an excellent point on institutional stability, and I think that's I didn't have the term in art when I was trying to explain what we were trying to do. And it's critical, and I wouldn't want to see this legislation damage our ability to move forward now. Now, he may not have been applying it exactly how I'm using it right this minute, but the fact is the stability of Amtrak and its future are critical to have any confidence in us as a centerpiece or anything else. And this legislation and the way that we're characterized on a regular basis does not sustain that in the investment public, and it's not accurate, sir.
Mr. Hart.
Yes, Chairman Shuster. I define it as political sustainability, and it is a very key factor, and that's why it is important to generate bipartisan support. But I believe you can do that. There are 29 states in the country that have public-private partnerships in operation now, and there are many countries, including, you know, the 9 models that I referred to for public-private partnerships in rail in my long-form testimony today. It's nothing to be afraid of. It's something to be encouraged, and the private sector is ready, Congresswoman Norton, to invest in Amtrak and invest in the Northeast Corridor. In my preparation for today and my preparation for earlier testimony, I've met with major financial institutions in New York, in and around the world that are willing to invest capital under the right circumstances that don't necessarily, you know, exploit the opportunity. They do want a return on their investment. They do want to minimize their risk. But there is a key factor regarding political sustainability that overrides everything. So I think this is an opportunity for the committee, bipartisan committee, one of the most bipartisan committees in Congress, to show real leadership. The timing is now, because as we approach the debt service, the debt ceiling debate, which is going to really tear Congress apart and possibly the entire country apart, this opportunity here, the leadership of this committee, can impact even that debate, because public-private partnerships are the way of the future. And to deny that fact is to deny the reality that we are not going to be able to fund public transportation to the levels that we have in the past. I wish we could. We just can't. And public-private partnerships, let the money players come to the table. That's one of the things that's absent on this panel. And I'm hoping that there can be another hearing where we bring the real money players to the table and give them an opportunity to put their proposal and their money on the table. That was one of the big problems with the move to reject the Florida plan. It didn't give the private sector an opportunity to show that they were willing to put money up. And frankly, the folks that advocated for the rejection of that money played right into Amtrak's hands, because they couldn't create the competitive environment to bring in other international and domestic players that wanted to compete with Amtrak on a true high-speed system in Florida. That was wiped away, and everything fell back to Amtrak by default. We've got to create an opportunity for the private sector to speak for itself, put the terms and conditions that are acceptable, and then let the Congress, the DOT, Amtrak, and others evaluate it. The money will speak for itself at the time that they're given the opportunity.
Thank you very much, Mr. Hart. And with that, I'll yield to Ms. Holmes Norton.